Hello. We continue our DAR lecture series today with someone familiar to this series. We have the pleasure of having Craig R. Scott with us and is presenting Finding Women, Maiden Name Unknown. This is the topic that comes to mind as we complete applications, supplemental applications, or even just our own personal research. In case some of you missed his introduction the other times, among his many accomplishments, Craig is a MA, CG, FUGA, is the president and CEO of Heritage Books, Inc., a genealogical publishing firm with over 8,500 titles in print. A professional genealogical and historical researcher for more than 30 years. He specializes in records of the National Archives, especially those that relate to the military. He is currently the coordinator of the SLIG consultation track, helping students solve their brick wall problems. Hello, Craig. You are no
Hello.
stranger to us, and it's great to see you again. We look forward to your presentation on this difficult research question. Ladies, I present Craig R. Scott.
Again. Thank you, Pat. Tonight we're going to be talking about finding females' maiden name unknown. It's actually one of my favorite topics, how to determine the unnamed maiden name. It's really a frustrating problem for most genealogists. It never fails that you have everything you need about that family except her maiden name in order to get back to her family. There are a lot of resources that you can use that will be useful to you in your research. One of them is Discovering Your Female Ancestors by Sharon Carmack. Another is The Hidden Half of Family by Christina Schaefer. This one is especially good for looking at what laws are like in specific states and also what's available from the Family History Center. There are a couple of internet genealogy magazines out there that were dedicated to tracing your female ancestors. If you can find them, they might also be useful to you. A lot of information that will be useful to you can be found in either land records or in courthouses. So my suggestion is that you add to your library Patricia Law Hatcher's book on locating your roots and Christine Rose's book, Courthouse Research for Family Historians. I found both these books to be very useful in explaining how to do things and explaining definitions that I may find in documents along the way. Of course, the other place that you're going to want to look for definitions is Black's Law Dictionary, especially when you're dealing with land and courthouses. It's available in paper, expensively, and also available as a CD from Archive CD Books. There are a couple of quick sheets that you'll find will be useful to you. There is one by Carmack on finding female ancestors, but probably more importantly is the one by Elizabeth Schoen Mills on the FAN principle or cluster research. FAN stands for friends, family, associates, and neighbors. And all of these people probably knew the maiden name of your ancestor. So what will help? Well, we're going to go through a whole bunch of different records tonight to give you some idea about what kinds of records can be useful. Marriage records can always be useful. In fact, that's probably is the first place you want to look. In that, usually a marriage license or a marriage return will give you the maiden name of the individual. You may find the information in cemetery records because many tombstones will have the maiden name on the tombstone. Census records will be helpful. Land records, as I've said already, will be helpful. Church records, as in marriage records or in membership records. My experience with church records is that you can find a woman in a church membership list of a certain name, and then all of a sudden she marries and her name changes. So you would look from one list to the next to look for a name change. You also may find the information in probate records. Probate records, especially of the father or the mother or the brother or the sister, if they didn't have children, of the person whose maiden name you're looking for. The father or mother may very well identify the married name of their daughter. Court records are a good place to look. People are always suing each other for some reason or another. And sometimes siblings all get together to sue another sibling. And if that woman got married before they sued that other sibling, it's likely that you'll be able to identify her maiden name through the other males that are part of their et al. Newspapers, I find, are especially helpful if they list engagements or they list marriages, because normally a newspaper will tell you who an individual's parents are. Death records may tell you also who someone's parents are and may also give you the maiden name. Military records are a special case. They may give you information about the marriage of the individual and who married them. A widow who's receiving a pension has to prove to the government that she was married to the survivor, to the soldier, sailor, or Marine, if she's to get the pension. So military records are, and by military records, I mean pensions. I don't mean compiled military service records. But in some military records, you may find the names of parents. That doesn't work very well for maiden names, but we're going to talk about evidence in a bit. And if you can prove that someone is someone's brother, you're going to get to the maiden name. Naming patterns are somewhat important, but not really very much. But they may lead you down one rabbit hole after another, or they may lead you exactly where you want to be. And of course, there are other records. There's also something called an implied marriage, meaning it's not this Fairfax County, Virginia Implied Marriages book by Marty Hyatt and myself is not really a book about marriages. It's a book about records other than marriage records that describe marriages. So if an implied marriage book is available, you definitely want to look for it. Unfortunately, there are not very many counties that have implied marriage books. So let's talk about marriage records for a moment. What do you need to know? In order to find the marriage record, you need to know the spouse's name, meaning the male spouse, the marriage location, and the approximate marriage date. That's the easiest way to get to it. You may, of course, have a spouse, his name is John Smith, so you want to make sure you also know who his spouse is, at least their first name, before you even start looking. So you want to have basically the name of the groom, at least the first name of the bride, approximately where they got married, and approximately what the marriage date was. Now, a lot of people will assume that they just can't find the marriage and they weren't married or whatever because they're not married in the marriage location that you expect them to be in. Well, we're going to work on that in a bit. What you may find are registrations of marriage. They come in a variety of forms, a variety of pieces. This is one for one of my ancestors, and her name is Cornelia M. Kingman. Now, I can assure you that I found this record 30 years after I located Cornelia Kingman. But it's nice to find that record because not only does it give me Cornelia's maiden name, she's my great-great-grandmother, and she's from Walworth County, Wisconsin. And this is her marriage to Benjamin Parrish. It gives me both his parents' names and her parents' names. Unfortunately, it doesn't, in this case, give us the two mothers' maiden names. Recognize also that when it comes to a marriage, there are various kinds of records. There's a license, that's permission to marry. There's a certificate, that's proof of the actual marriage. There's the marriage announcement in a newspaper or church bulletin. There's the publishing of marriage banns, sometimes 3 times before the marriage even occurs, depending on the church that you belong to. And there are marriage bonds, people attesting to the fact that it's okay for these two people to get married, that there is not really an impediment to their marriage. But which one of these are actual proof of marriage? Is a marriage license proof of marriage? No. Is a marriage certificate proof of marriage? Yes, as is a ministerial return. Is a marriage announcement proof of marriage? Well, it should be, but there might be a mistake. Are marriage banns proof of marriage? They are not. Are marriage bonds proof of marriage? They are not. But they all do lead you to the maiden name. Let's talk about cemetery records for a little bit. Many times a tombstone will mention the maiden name of the wife. So you need to know the place of burial and place of death. This is a lot easier now than it ever was before because of Find a Grave and Billion Graves and those kinds of websites. And sometimes attached to those website records will be information about the family. And in Find a Grave, you may just have to click on the woman's name and it might lead you to her parents. You never know, but it's worth a look. Now, the types of records that we're going to find in cemeteries are tombstones, burial registers. We especially want to look for nearby plots for possible family members, and that is problematic in things like Find a Grave. Nothing's better than actually going to a cemetery. Sometimes I've been known to just pull off to the side of the road and wander through a cemetery just for fun. I don't know how many of you all are like that. But this is difficult in Find a Grave, but you may be able to look for everyone of that surname within a specific cemetery, specific county, that kind of thing. That's not really going to help you find the maiden name, but it may help you find the parents of your person as soon as you find that maiden name. There's also such thing as transfer permits that allows, and burial permits also. They allow remains to move from place to place. And sometimes on transfer permits and burial permits, a maiden name will be mentioned, but not very often. So which of these records do I believe results in a body actually being beneath a tombstone, or that the information on the tombstone is correct? None of it. Tombstones can result in things called cenotaphs, which means that nobody's actually buried there. Well, that gets rid of the burial permit and the transfer permit. Burial registers are just what people told them. Tombstones can be carved in ways that don't have correct information. Nearby plots for possible family members, you don't know whether they're family members or not until you research it. But again, because it's so simple these days to find them on places like Find a Grave and Billion Graves, it's always a good idea to look. Transfer permits and burial permits are found either in county or town records. When you're going, if you're ever going to a cemetery and you don't know where to find a tombstone, you know, either because they don't have a map or it's a large cemetery or something, I've had people say, well, go find the sexton. I find that the guy that cuts the grass knows more about where everybody is buried than anyone else. This is my grandfather, William Woody Roberts. He's buried in Fort Lincoln. He is on the left-hand side of the lot. This is Florence Matilda Beely. She's on the right-hand side of the lot. You might guess that the relationship between William Woody Roberts and Florence M. Beely is strained, given that these two people are so far apart in the same lot. There's no one buried in between them, but Florence is his mother-in-law, and he hated her with a passion. He got rid of his two daughters when he forced them to have a double wedding, and the minute they had that double wedding, she showed up and she lived with him until the day she died. And he, I'm sure, was just very happy to see that she would be buried next to him. Or better yet, she died before he did, and I can imagine why they put him so far away from her. But here we have William Woody Roberts's wife's name, maiden name, which is Beely. And the supposition is because they're in the same lot, that's possible. When my grandmother, Helen Grace Beely Roberts, died, she has to be cremated and not to be put in between these two individuals under any circumstances. Now here's William Woody Roberts' father, Roland Woodson Roberts. and he's in a South Boston cemetery. And this here's Emily Robertson Roberts, who is his second wife, not my ancestor. I didn't have a good relationship with her as a child, but I know her maiden name, which is Robertson. Except maybe it's Carlton, because this is the tombstone right next to her. It turns out that her name is Carlton and her first marriage was Robertson. The other thing to look at is census records. Now, theoretically, before you start looking for the marriage of someone, you should find them on the census first. Where I come from, you do census research first and you exhaust the census records. My experience is that if you don't do this first, you probably will get in trouble one way or the other. You want to check every year that's available. You do want to check situations where the couple is living with other people, because if they're living with other people, except in a boarding house, or maybe also in a boarding house, but not as likely in a boarding house, they probably are living with a relative, especially if that person they're living with is 20 to 30 to 35 years older than they are. You also want to look at the names of families living nearby. The question is, how far will a man travel to court a woman? And the secret to that answer, in my mind, is, does he have a horse? So it's different whether he's walking or whether he's riding a horse. It probably is within 5 to 10 miles either way. Or maybe they met at, how did they meet? Those kind of questions you're going to have to answer if you can't find the names of the families living nearby. So this is the 1880 census for Benjamin Parrish, and his wife is C.A. Best we can do in the 1880 census. In the 1870 census, there's no one that in, how do I word this? I have a sense that C.A. is Cornelia, and I have a sense that her name might be Kingman, but I don't know. So I go back into the 1870 census. Remember, they got married in 1873, to see if Cornelia is there, and I don't see her. One wonders. So I go back another year to 1860, and if you look at line 6, there's Cornelia. So could I, being unable at this point in time to find the marriage record, one of the things I did to prove that Cornelia was a possibility is I looked for all the other Cornelias in the county. There weren't any. So my sense was that this Cornelia, who is of the same age time-wise as the CA in the other census, might very well be the woman, my great-great-grandmother, and that her maiden name is Kingman. So that worked out very well when all the other pieces came together. You want to look at older people living nearby also, and you want to look for women disappearing from a census of the same name. Let's talk about land records. Land does get passed from father to daughter on occasion. One of the ways that you can determine that and the maiden name of an individual is to examine, find a set of abstracts for land deeds, and look for the person that you're looking for under her married name in the land deeds abstract, and see if she's found in the land deed of someone else. That person is likely to be her father, but it also could be her brother, if it's a brother that never married, had land, and had no heirs. There also is the issue of when land gets passed for example, in an intestacy or even by will, where each child gets a portion of the land. So if you see 3 boys of the same last name and 2 girls of different names all acquiring equal plots of land, you've found that maiden name. I like to use Google Maps or Google Earth or anything that will get me a view of what the land looks like. What's farmland? What are the land boundaries? A lot of these boundaries are tree lines, so that you have a sense of what the relationship is of the people on the ground. Now, this happens to be Loudoun County, Virginia, just a mile or two south of the Potomac River, south of Brunswick, Maryland. To the west, there's a mountainous, if anything on the East Coast can be mountainous. And what we find is that men are marrying women whose surnames are not in the area to the east of the mountain. And there really, today, isn't any way to get to the other side of the mountain except through gaps which are a good distance away. And what they missed was that there was an egg path, a trail where women would bring eggs from the west side of the county over the mountain down to the people into the east side of the county. And some of those women married men on the east side of the mountain. So what kinds of records are we going to be dealing with? We're going to look at land deeds. We're going to look for sales of small amounts of money, because that probably means family. We definitely want to create an in and out chart for all the land that we have. And what I mean is the in and out chart first is for the woman and her spouse, because for the longest period of time, any land that would come to the woman would be controlled by the spouse. So you want to look at how the spouse acquired the land. Did he get land from the father? Did he get land from a brother? Those kind of things. You also want to do, once you've identified the maiden name, you want to do the in and out chart for all the land of the father and see how they match up. You definitely want to plot the land of the neighborhood, because neighbors are the ones that are going to be marrying each other. Could be a near neighbor, could be a far neighbor, but you have to address the issue of who are the neighbors for more than one reason, not just the land. So there are some age limitations associated with women, and these are usually, and it depends, and a lot of it is a function of the time period and the state that you're talking about. But usually a woman can buy or be granted land before the age of 21, but she usually cannot sell it before she's 21. There are several gender limitations. Usually a single woman or widow can purchase land. Again, if over 21, she'll be able to sell it. A married woman is unable to sell land because it's all under her husband's control, as I said, and that includes land brought to the marriage, and that includes land inherited during the marriage. So if she brings land with her, it's under her husband's control. If she inherits it because her father dies after she's married, it again is under husband's control. There's such a thing in law called fem sole. This changes the situation a little bit. In other words, she can be declared by a court or legislature, depending on the time period, to be in charge of her own land and her own person. So that would make it possible for her to be able to sell land and have it take it from underneath her husband's control. There are some dower limitations. So a wife is entitled to 1/3 interest in all the lands owned during the marriage, or the wife is entitled to a 1/3 lifetime interest. It doesn't have too much to do with determining the maiden name of that person, but it has something to do with determining the maiden name of her children if you're coming at it from the other end, taking into account those lifetime interests. In other words, if a woman of a different surname were to all of a sudden acquire interest in the land of another woman, it could be because that other woman has died and she has forfeited her 1/3 lifetime interest, and therefore she's in an intestacy, she's now, as an heir of that woman, entitled to the land. So dower's land that came to her through inheritance during the marriage. You will find in some land records things called dower release. Usually that is a mid-Atlantic kind of thing, basically Virginian. It happens prior to the Revolution. If you see a dower release, you definitely want to determine how that husband acquired the land, especially in North Carolina, for example, where you don't have to have dower. A woman, not the seller's wife, but mother who released her 1/3 gain through her deceased husband is what I just talked about. So if all of a sudden she acquires land out of the blue, you want to see if her mother died. And you may be looking at how she acquired the land, and you may be able to acquire the maiden name that way. Some of the things that you want to examine in land records are who's the buyer, the grantee, who's the seller, the grantor. Are they the same? Is there a relationship between these people, or is it just a land sale? When was the deed written, and when was it recorded? It's possible for it to be recorded 100 years later, so you might have to track things back. Whenever you're dealing with any document that has witnesses on it, you want to know what the relationship is of that witness to your family, to your person. It may be that the witness is the town drunk who hung around the courthouse in order to pick up loose change by being a witness, but that person might also be your relative. You want to know who all the neighbors are in the bordering properties because you want to create that neighborhood. You want to know what the land description is because you're going to create that in and out table, I insist. And that land description is going to be part of that in and out table. So you'll know when it's bought and when it's sold. You also have to, as part of that in and out table, have the acreage. Was more sold than originally bought? If it was, where'd that extra land come from? Or was there a survey in between that said actually there was more land? You definitely want to know the water courses that run through land and around the land that your family owns, because that has a lot to do with the land description. You want to know what districts they're in. You want to know if there were previous owners, or was it a patent? Was the original land acquired from the government? And you definitely want to know what type of document it is, because it makes a difference. So let's talk about church records. So the church records that we're used to are births, baptisms, or christening records of children. And what you want to look at those are, who are the godparents? Who are the sponsors? Is there a relationship between the godparents or the sponsors of that child to the parents? Why did the parents ask that individual to be the godparent? Is the question that you want to ask. Is there a relationship? There's going to be church marriage records, just like there are going to be civil records. You may find that there are civil records and on a different date, church marriage records, because they got married civilly and then they needed to get married in the eyes of the church. So you may have two different marriage records for people. You also, in regards to churches, want to look for changes in church membership lists. You can track a woman and the change in her last name because she pretty much stays with the church. What you'll also see sometimes is that the groom was never a member of the church before, wasn't on the church membership list, but after the wedding, all of a sudden is on the church membership list. So you'll see them probably together, or unless they're separate lists, but find the groom also and see if he was on the list before they got married. Let's talk about probate records. You definitely are going to want to find the probate of the people in the general area of where the husband and wife are living if you don't know who her parents are, because there's a chance she's going to be identified among the probates of some neighbor. I don't recommend that you spend a whole lot of time reading original wills to begin with. I recommend that you find some abstract of wills that's been published or some list of heirs that have been published, and then track them down that way, and then go read the original will. The other thing to look at is estate sales. Who are the purchasers? Who are the people who are buying a majority of the items in the estate sales? Now, I have an ancestor, my third great grandfather in Davidson County, Tennessee, that I promise you, he attended every estate sale there was between 1805 and 1812 in Davidson County. So he's not going to be much help to you. But what you're looking for are people of the same surname buying things. In other words, 2 or 3 people of the same surname buying things, because what they may be doing is buying them for their sister, who is the widow. So always look at estate sales. Look for who gets the bed, because they definitely want their sister to have a bed. But try to track these people down, and you may have some luck that way in getting clues about what the maiden name might be. Now, the probate list of heirs, this doesn't work for the woman whose maiden name you're looking for, her list of heirs. What you're looking for are the list of heirs of those individuals who might be her parents. And she may be very well listed in a list of heirs. There are other records that you're going to want to look for, and those are civil court records or equity court records. They're called different things. They also could be called orphans court records. What you're looking for are where siblings sue together, somebody, usually the executor of an estate or some creditor or something. You want to look where siblings sue each other because the executor happens to be a sibling. You want to see where siblings sue her husband. Always look for where her husband is being sued and who is suing her. So, excuse me, suing him, because they very well may be her siblings. And you want to look for anything that says husband et ux. So all those are all things, and a lot of, especially in Virginia now, a lot of equity court, or as they're called in Virginia, chancery court records are now online at the county level. So you can just do surname searches there and see what you can find searching for the husband. I find that newspaper records are a lot of fun for more contemporary research. I recently was the genealogist for my 50th high school reunion, and I'm told that we had the largest high school reunion 50th that they've ever had, and largely it was because I spent a lot of time in newspapers looking for birth announcements, looking for engagement announcements, looking for marriage announcements, so I could find the married names of all these women whose maiden names I did know. But the reverse works also. You can find the marriage announcement or the engagement announcement in the newspaper, and maybe it might lead you not only right to the name of the maiden name of the individual, but may lead you to the names of her parents and where her parents live and where she originally was. The same thing goes for obituaries. For every single one of those students, I looked for an obituary under their student name and then under their married name, but it may in an obituary tell you who the parents are. That usually is what happens. My favorite part of the newspaper, though, is the gossip and social columns, where they will tell you that Jane Smith's parents, the McGillicuddies, are in town for the next 2 weeks visiting with their daughter. It's a pretty good clue. It'll get you there. The other thing is death records. Now, I don't put much faith in death records because there's something called an informant, and I'm not sure what the informant knows. But the informant in this case knew what they were talking about. This is Benjamin Parrish, and we've already talked about Benjamin twice today, third great grandfather, the one married to Cornelia Kingman. And in his death certificate, they've identified his father and his mother as Sarah Rand. And in fact, his mother is Sarah Rand. The other thing you can do is, what I've done is I've gone to the cemetery where these people are, had somebody take me who knew where the gravestones were, and she took me back 5 generations of parishes and Rands and others, Kingmans also, in cemeteries in Walworth County. And I asked her how long did it take her to find all these tombstones? And she said, not long at all. My mother brought them to me. So as a little girl, what's the nugget that I got from that was, always look for local people who are relative of yours in the area where this family lived, because they might know the maiden name. Now, military records, there are only really 2 types that have, well, there are 3 types that have family information in them. The first is pension records. The second is underage enlistment. Now, in the Navy side, there's things called apprentice papers, where if they're underage, the next of kin are identified. I have one case where George Edward Palmer Jr. is a sailor. He's underage, and his uncle David and his aunt Elizabeth are the individuals who are sending him off to the Navy. So either David's surname is a possibility, or tracking down Elizabeth's marriage is a possibility. Pension records provide you with proof of marriage if it's a widow's pension. If it's a survivor's pension, he very well in his application will tell you the marriage, will tell you the maiden name, and will tell you all of the children. If it's a survivor, generally in the Civil War, will give you the names of all the children and their dates of birth. If it's the widow's pension, usually it will only give you the name of a child under the age of 16. But again, it's also a function of which act and when. Whenever you're dealing with a pension, know that they have to prove the marriage. So there's a marriage record somewhere. It either is in the application or it's in a payment file. And that applies to the Revolution, War of 1812, the Mexican War, and the Civil War. It doesn't matter what war it is, that widow is going to have to prove that she's married, and part of that proof is going to be her maiden name, hopefully. So here's Cornelia, and she's a parish there, and here's Benjamin Parish. So I know that there is a pension that I can look at for to determine if Cornelia does get a pension. I can tell that by looking at the card. Notice the word widow down at the bottom, and the 2 sets of numbers. The first number is an application number, and the second number is a certificate number. It's possible to just have an application number. That's where she attempts to get the pension. But the certificate number means that she did get the pension, which means she did prove her marriage to Benjamin Parish. I should note that I've been doing military research for 35, 45 years, and this is my great-great-grandfather. And until 3 years ago, I didn't know he was in the Civil War. My father never told me that his great-grandfather was in the Civil War, just his grandfather. So always look for a military pension. This is a pension claim from the Revolution. Well, actually, it's 1839, but it's a Revolutionary War soldier by the name of Isaac Kingman, who dies in Goshen, Massachusetts, in the 11th of November, 1839. So when we look at his pension, the date is there, but it's not. The fact that Cornelia Kingman is maiden named Packard is in that pension. But what happens if you have a widow's pension where the soldier never never has a pension to begin with. She gets a pension under some act after 1836 because she's a widow. Well, her name is Content Kingman, and there are two witnesses here, Oliphant Packard and Betsy Kingman. Well, it's pretty easy to prove that Betsy Kingman was the daughter of Content, but Oliphant happens to be her brother. So wherever you see witnesses, you're going to want to examine who those witnesses are and attempt to establish a relationship between the witness and the person that they're witnessing, because they know them. So there are naming patterns, but there are unfortunately, they're not much good in determining a maiden name. They may be helpful because they name their first male child after the first name of the wife's father, but that's not helpful, really, when you come right down to it. It's a guide maybe, but not very useful. Look for surnames being used as middle names in the family. My middle name is Roberts. My mother's maiden name is Roberts. But if you were to look at my son, whose middle name is Roberts, you wouldn't find that his mother's maiden name was Roberts. I have a sister-in-law who named a child Ian Cameron Scott and a child Abigail Mackenzie Scott. And she's a genealogist. And as I went to her as another genealogist in the family and said, I know your family. Where did these middle names come from? She said, nowhere. I like them. And she said, and I said to her, don't you think that'll confuse genealogists in the future? And she just smiled. There is the possibility that the eldest daughter may be named for a maternal grandmother, as naming patterns go. So there are other records that you could look for. I determined that the mother of Hiram Hawes was an Anne Whitfield, because I was able to find the other siblings of Hiram. One of them was Newton Hawes, and he went to a college. He went to Williams College, Massachusetts, and they had an alumni directory where he identified in his entry in the alumni directory who his parents were at the maiden name level. And that just busted things open for me, because I had spent years trying to find out who Hiram Hawes's mother and father were without much success, at least the maiden name of the mother. Always look for people who are described as cousin. Cousin really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean they're actually cousins. It could be near friend, it could be neighbor, it could be something, but it's someone that someone cares about, and that someone probably knows the maiden name. So you also want to look for diaries of near neighbors, because they may describe the wedding that you can't find the marriage record for. They may describe who her near friend who's getting married and who she's marrying, that kind of thing. So look for diaries of near neighbors, look for letters, and look for Bible records, because a Bible record might very well provide you with the maiden name. State historical societies and state genealogical societies tend to collect Bible records. The Library of Virginia has published 2 volumes of Bible records. NGS has a collection of Bible records. So there are Bible records everywhere. Published a few of them myself. So that brings us to the end. I believe we have time for questions, and I look forward to it.
Well, first, I want to thank you. You made information available to us that's really valuable. Plus, there were several things I hadn't heard before, so thank you for that. The question number 1, during the colonial era, was there a colony or state that was better about remembering the ladies than others? If so, in what types of documents?
Well, the answer is No. There's no colony or state that was better about remembering the ladies, because I'm sorry to say, ladies didn't account for much then in the eyes of men.
Right.
And there wouldn't be any reason for them to be treated differently. Now, individual men would treat their wives differently, but you would learn about that in the diaries of the women who wrote about it. Or you would learn about it in the diaries of their neighbors. But that could be
Okay.
good or bad.
True. Depending on how they felt about them.
Yeah.
All right. Number 2, when did the legal practice of divorce begin? And since grounds for divorce varied widely from state to state, how can we accurately search for where the divorce might have been obtained versus residence?
Well, divorce has been around for a really long time from the perspective of North America. I'm always remember the joke about the Catholic priest who invited the men to come in and talk about. He said, "We're not going to talk about divorce. We're going to talk about murder," because for many churches there was no such, especially the Catholic Church, there was no such thing as divorce. But most of the people in the colonies are not Catholic; they're Protestant, and Protestant divorce is a thing. At the time of the settling of the colonies, it's rare. And until the Revolution, for the most part, most states required assembly action or state legislature action in order to have a divorce. So it depends. The first thing you have to do is know what the laws are in the state at the time of when you think the divorce may have occurred. Who had the responsibility for granting the divorce? Was it the state or was it the county? If it was the county, you look in county records. If it was the state, you look in assembly records or legislature records.
Okay.
So, I mean, divorce is really not a thing in the colonial time period. It isn't until much after that, till we become a much more secular nation, that it moves out of it doesn't move immediately at the time of the Revolution out of many states. Over time, it moves out of the legislatures into the counties because the legislatures don't want to have to deal with it anymore.
Right. All right. Thank you. Question number
But
3.
there's also, I have to add,
Oh,
there's
go ahead.
also the possibility that people may not be divorced, but separate from each other,
Yes.
and someone heads west and has another family and is a bigamist. And everybody thinks he's gotten a divorce or his wife died, and many times you can't trust the woman to say that she'll call herself a widow when actually all that really happened was her husband left, but she
her.
saves face by describing herself as a widow. So you want to be careful.
Sure. All right. Question number 3. Another divorce question. If divorce wasn't a formal legal process, how would we know that this was what had occurred? And I guess we really wouldn't know for sure.
Well, but divorce is a formal process.
Right.
Okay. Because one of the things that you have to deal with is the jurisdictional issues of, just because you can't find them in a specific jurisdiction doesn't mean an event didn't occur in a different jurisdiction. For example, I was searching for a marriage in Fauquier County, Virginia, and it just was not there. It was in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And when we published the register for DC marriages for that time period, I of course looked, and there it was. So if you can't find a marriage in one place, where is everybody else in that county getting married if they're not getting married there? Go look for the Gretna Green, where it's easier to get married. Go look for the big city because they want to have their honeymoon in the big city and then come back to the farm. So, I mean, there are a lot of things there, but just because you can't find a divorce doesn't mean there wasn't one. And just because somebody says they were divorced doesn't mean that they were.
Well,
My own great grandfather had he died in 68, and the woman buried next to him, his wife Alma, is not my great grandmother who died in 73, and they were not divorced.
Wow.
So
Well, and sometimes surrounding counties in the earlier years were easier to access than the one that they were living in to get to the courthouse. And I've seen that happen also.
there's also the point that county lines change, but people don't.
Yes, yes,
You know, the house may be in 3 different counties over time, so you may have to
yes.
check all 3 counties.
All right, let's go to question number 4. Leaving aside the failure to record women in the census until 1850, what are the workarounds?
Well, the women are recorded in the census, you just don't have their names,
Right, right,
but you do have their ages. So the basic, I don't really consider it to be a workaround. In dealing with the census from 1790 to 1840, we're dealing with eliminating people who are not related to us versus this must be the family that I want to research. And because they don't have a woman of the right age, we can put that family to one side. Or they don't
right,
have the children of the right age, we can put that family to one side. So basically, it isn't that they're not recorded, it's just their names aren't recorded. Their age is recorded
right.
in ranges, and you just have to use it that way. I mean, I take them from the 1850 back. Always go backwards. Don't go from 1790 to 1800, 1810. Go from 1880 to 1870 to 1860 to 1850 and
Right,
work backwards.
right.
So that makes it a lot easier.
And those marks get important in that case.
Those marks are very important.
True. All right, question number 5. When did women begin the practice of retaining their maiden names when married? Was this governed by legislation or practice?
Well, first of all, the practice of retaining a maiden name, especially in a Scottish woman, has been forever. And it's more likely that you'll find a Scottish woman's maiden name on a tombstone than her married name sometimes, if they're sharing a tombstone. Because there's no question about what her married name was, but there may be some
Right,
question about what her maiden name is, and she wants to make it clear that that's where she came from. So you have this identification of maiden name with, I'll call it, in the case of Scottish and Irish clan names. So she wants to make it clear that at some point she belonged to that family, not this family.
that's
So
right.
it's not a begin the practice of kind of thing because it's been around forever.
Okay,
Was it governed by legislation or practice? I don't know of any legislation that says that a woman must take the name of her husband, although it might exist somewhere, or it may have existed at some point in time, but I don't know of it existing today. And so it really isn't practice, because practice would infer that everybody was doing it, and
right.
everybody isn't doing it, but a lot of people are. And it's as a modern phenomena, it's probably since the 60s, but it existed before the 60s.
Right. Okay, let's go to question number 6. I believe I know the father, but probate records show only my grandmother's husband. I do not have a marriage record of this union, but they are in the census together in the same household. Any suggestions?
So what you lack is a census record for a couple who is in the census together.
Right.
My only suggestion is you stop too soon. You haven't looked long enough or hard enough. Now, I don't know what the time frame is for this, or the state is for this, so there's not enough context to give a good answer. But if I have them together in the census and they have children, my assumption is that they're likely probably married, at least in the eyes of that neighborhood.
Okay.
Although I do know the case of John Whaley of Loudoun County, Virginia, who married one woman, had several children with her, then built a house next door and put her sister in there and had several children with her. And in his will, he specifically delineated which child belonged to which mother, and that he was the father of all of them. And somebody had the nerve one day to go to the Loudoun County Courthouse and slice out that will out of the will book, God forbid. And the deputy clerk, her name was Louisa Hutchison, at the time knew where the original will was. So she typed it up, inserted it in the will book. So every time the will book opened up, it would go right to those pages. So that's living proof there is a God. And I believe that if you work long enough and hard enough, you will actually find what you're looking for. You didn't tell me what census they were together in.
No.
So I'm assuming it was 1850 on. I would track them back through the censuses. And if you get to the, and then I would look at when their first children were born, and I would think that their marriage should occur sometime before that, but not necessarily,
Right.
but close enough. And are the children born in various places, or is everybody born in the same place? What you want to do is you want to look for the migration of the husband. Did he bring the wife with him? You know, how soon is he in the county? And I usually figure in my own mind, just as a guideline, not as anything important, that people don't buy land until they've been in the county for a while, and that might be 5 years before they actually buy land. Nobody buys land immediately. They scope it out first because they don't want to get bad land. So figure
Wow.
out how he got to the county, and you may be able to figure out how she got to the county also.
That's interesting. I had never heard that concept before, that they were in the county for a while before they bought land. I guess that
Well,
would
you
be,
wouldn't go right to a place and buy a house immediately.
no, probably not unless it was next door to my family or something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Question number 7. It seems quite common in some families to give a child a mother's maiden name as the first or middle name. Can the naming convention help confirm parentage? And you address that. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to
Well,
say about it.
except for the last part, the naming convention cannot confirm parentage.
Right.
The naming convention can give you a clue
Clue. Yeah.
to as to what path or what rabbit hole you'll go down. Some poor ancestor, descendant of mine rather, by the name is going to go looking for that Mackenzie family or that Cameron family that just doesn't exist because she liked those middle names. Whereas in my case, mine is my mother's maiden name, so that would be a clue. But it doesn't confirm anything.
That's kind of like the junior and senior
But
problems.
junior and senior doesn't confirm anything either because senior could have been junior and junior could have been senior, but senior died and a new senior showed up or something. Junior and senior doesn't even mean that those people of the same surname, junior or senior, are related to each other. They just
Right.
happen to be in the community, and they're like what George Black in Surnames of Scotland calls T names. In other words, he's known as junior, but actually he's senior now, and there's another junior.
A lot of times it just
I mean,
differentiated
I
the
just went looking
people.
for a man the other day who was a fourth, and I thought he'd be easy to find, except in his obituary, he's a junior.
Okay, that gets complicated.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, question number 8. You always have good answers, and we really enjoy it. Which court record would be more likely to have a woman's full name and that of her relatives? And I have a question to ask you on top of that. The fem sole, what records would that be in? You mentioned it. I had not heard that term before.
The fem sole will be in court records because it's the court who determines that she is fem sole.
Any particular court?
Uh, Equity, chancery,
Okay. Okay.
county court.
Okay.
Although it could be legislated during the colonial period, so it could be an
Okay.
assembly or state legislature materials also.
I
So
thought
which
that was
court
interesting.
record would be more likely to have a woman's full name and that of her relatives? A chancery court record where they are suing together somebody.
Okay.
So for example, I have a Mary Cameron, who is my 5th great grandmother, and a Christina Tolliver, spelled Taliaferro, but Tolliver, who are suing an Augustus Parsons, and they're claiming that Augustus Parsons was born after their father died. And he's claiming to be, he is claiming, and the father dies first, Woodson Parsons dies first, then Nancy Ann Mosby Parsons dies, and it's her death. Now, all three of those are the children of Nancy Ann Mosby Parsons. And they're suing because they feel that he's not entitled to 1/3 of her estate because she acquired her estate from their father. So what we have are a daughter, a sister I never knew about, Christina, a maiden name, Parsons, and I have her and Mary Cameron. That happened to be her second marriage. Her first marriage was to a John Toller. So I now know her second marriage. So I mean, and because there was Woodson Parsons and Nancy Ann Mosby. But anyway, that would be, Chancery would be one place. The other place would be a Quaker marriage record. Because in a Quaker marriage record, you'll see the names of the two people and then all the people who were there at the wedding. Now, there is a bunch of hokum that says that on the left-hand side are the grooms and on the left-hand side are the brides, and that's just silliness. That may be the case, but it's not a rule.
Right, right. All right, let's go to question 9. Have you found it helpful to research the neighbors? And you did talk about that. And if you want to expand on it, you can, or
Well,
you can.
There's this cluster research thing that Elizabeth Shown Mills has termed the fan.
Yes.
And depending on where you're at, the fan could be friends or the fan could be family, but the associates and the neighbors are always there. So I can't, if ever I'm up against a brick wall, I can't figure things out, I don't have a clue, I create the neighborhood because those people knew my ancestors. So I look for who their immediate neighbors are. And then if that doesn't help me, I go out one more ring to those immediate neighbors. And I try to figure out how those people who lived with my ancestors can help me. And it may be that their land deed does it. It may be that their will does it. It's always helpful to research neighbors, regardless of whether you're looking for a maiden name or not.
And that's always fun when they go through 2 or 3 states.
You could be a hatch, match, and dispatch person who only cares about what goes on the lineage papers.
Right.
Or you can have fat ancestors and know all their siblings and just take them back and know all their siblings. And then that way, when you finally do your DNA, if you haven't done it yet, and you find somebody's name in Ancestry or Family Tree DNA or 23andMe, you know who they are when their name shows up.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Question number 10. How often do you consider she might have had a previous marriage and that is passed on as her maiden name? And I'd like to say there, I have that thing in my family where part of the family thinks her name's one thing, her maiden name's one thing, and the other half of the family think it's another. The families where she, yeah, right.
How often? Every single time I encounter the problem. Every single time. Now, you can eliminate it when she gets married at 15 or 16 or 17 maybe. But if she's 35 when she gets married, there's a good chance there's a previous marriage. Look for in the census children who are older than the marriage of a different surname. And then you'll know. Because those children of a different surname that are older than the marriage will probably be the children of the first marriage.
Well, this has been a fun and productive time, and thank you for coming and being with us again. You're always good to hear. Our next and last lecture of this series will be Patty Lee Hobbs, as she enlightens us with her lecture on DNA. I look forward to her case study that she's completed. Until then, I leave you with this thought. I am a genealogist. Ask me about my ability to annoy people. Have a good day.